this meeting to hear the stakeholder perspectives. And as I've just said, and probably most of you heard, try to be careful about time management in this because we want to hear from all of our stakeholders. We very much appreciate you being here, and Jim Pickard will get us started.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did just want to say briefly in 45 seconds or less, the intent and the purpose of this agenda item is really just to broaden our stakeholder engagement, to make an attempt at a more robust interaction, and to we've always in the past invited the institution associations, but we wanted to add additional perspectives, and so the 5 panels that we've invited of stakeholders represent about 90 to 95% of all the dollars in our agency request budget. So we thought it important that you hear directly from them. And so today is our attempt to do that. And so if my list is correct, we have about 19 people total signed up to speak, which is fantastic and wonderful. And so without further ado, I do want to get to that, and whatever I can do to help facilitate, please let me know. Madam Chair, you are on mute.
I am on mute. We're starting with the Oregon Community College Association. And I see John Wyckoff.
Thank you, Chair Rowe, and I'm going to hand it over to our Executive Director, Morgan Cowling, briefly before we continue on our presentation. And I've got a timer running for myself in the background. So we'll try to keep.
Welcome, Morgan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Morgan Cowling. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the new Executive Director of the Oregon Community College Association. I started in January, so I've been here almost 5 months, and I'm excited for this first time joining the subcommittee. Before I turn it over to John to really run through our policy option packages and CSL work, I did want to kind of talk about the uncharted territory that we are in right now. You know, I think we all know that we're kind of hopefully coming out of the pandemic, but the pandemic, the economy, and really some of these federal investments we've had have had this confluence of 3 really drivers that have made this work on policy option packages and on our current service level more challenging, both for the institutions, but for students and future and potential students. So I just wanted to share that, you know, as we talk about this, you know, these themes will run through John's presentation, but we're really thinking about today as the beginning of a conversation with this committee, with the HEC, and you know, ultimately with the governor's office and the legislature, and look forward to talking with you more as we progress. Thank you.
Great, and I am going to, I have a presentation I'm going to use, and I have a few folks that I'm going to let chime in at some point as well that I will introduce briefly as we get to that point. Let me see if I can. Okay, I've never shared on, I have never shared on Teams before.
There's a little tray in the middle of the toolbar.
Well, I see the share. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
Share
guys.
tray.
I see share, but I don't. In Zoom, it lets you look at the. Oh, I see what it wants. Hold on. I think I can do this very quickly.
And does Morgan have your presentation? Could she do it if you can't?
I think I just got it uploaded.
I'll give you a thumbs up if you do.
I see it coming. It says it's uploading. Slowly. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started while it is loading. I can see it sort of in front of me. But just as really quick sort of introduction, just a reminder that about, you know, community colleges and the students we serve. Community colleges have a comprehensive mission, and we serve the most systemically marginalized students of all sectors of higher education. And you can see it now, is that correct? Great. Okay. We serve students regardless of their educational skill level. We're a primary access point for economic opportunity for students. And just as a real quick reminder of what that means, we serve students in, of course, the transfer courses, career and technical education, but also adult basic education, adult continuing education, GED, ESOL. So we are taking, and really the only sector of education and higher education that takes students, no matter what their skill level, with their skill development, their educational skill level, and we really did see, and you will see later in this, that group of students hit very hard by the pandemic. It really disrupted their lives, and you will see that in our enrollment. So just a quick summary of the policy option packages in total. The current service level increased to cover increased costs with ongoing or one-time revenue to cover revenue losses. And I'll talk a bit more about that, and we're going to have Jess Jacobs from Lynn Benton kind of walk through those actual numbers. I know 308 million is a very big number, and we want to talk about the reasons for that. Our current service level model really is a technical model that looks at what are the actual revenues, what are the actual costs, and then it derives a true current service level. And then, but we can talk about, what colleges are looking at and what that really means. And then POP number 2, expanded CTE programming and supports for low-income first generation and underrepresented students, and also particularly a very large group, I think the second largest group of Oregonians in terms of education are those with some college and no degree, and it's also targeted at sort of that group. And then last, increased funding to colleges for cybersecurity, about $12 million, and this is just a growing, exponentially almost growing need, and we'll talk about a bit. So just broadly speaking, the 308 for our first package of the current service level, the 308 million covers a net of $157 million in increased costs. And why I say net, because the full cost is about 221 million, but a net after the total revenue gets 157 million. But then we have 151 million in costs, or that have basically amounted to deficit spending during the pandemic. Because our revenues had fallen so precipitously, the numbers that we had in the model were no longer, 702 no longer covered the costs for the colleges. So there was significant deficit spending that would be carried forward. And we're asking therefore one-time or ongoing or one-time money as sort of a bridge. And I'll talk a bit more about that, or for students. And I can talk about why here in a second. So impacts to current service level. We have seen community colleges have unprecedented disruption to our services and declines in enrollment. Our tuition and other revenue sources are projected to drop, 131 in one part of the model, but I apologize, that should have been changed. Oh no, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Our revenue sources, we've seen a drop in $131 million overall, and then our costs are projected to increase 220 million overall, which we will get into a bit more. So here you can really see where our enrollment, beginning in 2015, we had a steady decline from a high, really a historic high during the middle of the Great Recession, when community college enrollment was at its probably highest peak, when folks were seeking education and training during the recession. As the economy picked up and employment got nearer and nearer to full employment, we started to see revenue and enrollment decline. But you can see at the beginning, and then it was starting to level out right before we got to the pandemic, and then you can see it dropped off, dramatically during the pandemic as our students faced challenges from not being able to provide childcare, or not being able to find childcare, having to provide childcare, not just a number of disruptions that really affected our population. We weren't offering many CTE courses because we were not able to do in-person learning, which is required for many of the CTE courses. There are lecture parts, but not all of them. So it had created real challenges, and it meant steep drop-offs in certain types of revenue. And you can see here, when we built the model around our $702 million ask from the state for the 21-23 biennium, and that was approved by the HEC, and that we got close to in the last session, we had in that certain revenues, all of our revenues plugged in at higher levels than for the most part ended up occurring because of that drop in enrollment. That first category of other, you can see here the drop. It went from about 121 million in our original model for 21-23 down to 64 million. You can see here in our tuition, also a significant drop from, I think, the 547 that we had originally down to, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but the 400 and something. This will be in numbers that we'll show you in more detail that it came to. Property tax was the one that went up slightly, and then this is very small for me, so I can't see. Oh, state aid, obviously. So state aid is the last one. And that is slightly smaller because we asked for 702, but there was some targeted funding within that really brought it to 696. But that means that all of these, well, federal funding covered most of these gaps, or did cover these gaps throughout the pandemic. It is gone. That money has, for the most part, been spent. It doesn't carry forward, but the gap does, right? We carry forward the deficit gap, and because it's been made up in deficit spending, and that is part of the big concern for us. And one of the problems that, or one of the things that we as we really look at this, we have sort of the two pieces. We have the piece that is the ongoing cost increases, those that are the costs, or the costs that have increased for the college. But then we have that piece that will no longer be covered by deficit spending, that if that were to suddenly go away, it would really create a fiscal cliffs for the college. If we started the next biennium with without that total of about $158 million in deficit spending, that's essentially what we would be cutting immediately. And the concern that we have there is, and what makes this situation unique is that, in my 13 or so years or 14 years at the community colleges, we've seen recessions, and as we get into recessions, or we've seen enrollment drops, and as enrollment goes down, the colleges have to begin to make adjustments and start to downsize, which essentially means laying off employees. For the first time, we had all of that covered by federal funds, so we weren't really doing that, right? All of those employee levels were really kept. That was one of the requirements of the federal funding. So that has really been put off. And if we take all of that money right away, that will mean that programs will just have to immediately shut down. And what colleges try to do so that we're not in sort of, in a cliff for the students, is they do what they call teach outs, where it takes a couple of years to teach out all the students currently in programs before you shut down the program, so the students aren't in a situation like they were with IT Technical Institute, where suddenly they didn't have a nursing education to go to. And so that is where we're talking about sort of bridge funding to get from here to where the colleges are either going to see enrollment pick back up, and they already are starting to make those adjustments to reflect the almost, the 35% or more decreases to enrollment statewide. But we're asking for sort of a bridge to help us get from there to there, so that our students aren't severely disrupted, as those cuts would have to be fairly sudden, because again, they weren't being made throughout the process because the federal money was propping that up. And here I'm going to turn it over to Jess Jacobs, who's for a few minutes, who's the Director of Accounting and Budget at Lynn Benton Community College, to talk you through some of the numbers.
All right, thank you, John. Hello, everyone. So there's a lot of numbers on the screen, so I'll try to kind of walk through this, but by all means, ask questions as I go. What you're seeing here are the results of the survey that I played kind of a facilitator role in, working with all 17 community college business officers to come up with their projections for the current biennium we're in, how we will close that out, and projections for growth in both revenue and expenses leading into next biennium. So we've kind of had, I think John has these on 2 slides. So the first slide here is just the revenue side of the picture. So you'll kind of notice on that first column, there's something called original projection. So that's what John was describing earlier, where 2 years ago, community colleges, when we were presenting this first CSL model, we said, hey, if the state can give us $702 million, we anticipate getting $420 million from property taxes, $547 from tuition, and so on. The next column over, which says projections/actuals, that is our current up-to-date projections on where we think we will actually end this biennium. So again, that's compiled by the survey across all the different schools. So you'll notice some pretty big swings, particularly in tuition, where it went from what we thought might be 547 to 465 million. Pandemic related, of course, primarily for the enrollment drop-off. You also notice a different category in there, and that's at the very bottom there, it says HERF. So this represents $53 million that collectively the schools brought over from HERF funding and were able to put directly into their general fund. So that was a one-time infusion of cash into our general funds. So you can see that enabled our total general fund revenues there at the bottom to equate to $1,717,000. So $1,717,000 for the biennium. So that is an updated look at where we project to end the current biennium. Moving to the right, you see change into next biennium. So now we're factoring in what are the projected growth rates in our different revenue categories. Property taxes, you can kind of see there in the middle, enrollment and tuition are split out. So we have some enrollment assumptions as well as some assumed increase in the tuition rate. So those are both factored in. We also have some estimates for that kind of catch-all other revenue category. So based on the changes we expect going into next biennium, and we're not talking about state aid yet, you can see front and center there the $308 million. That is the ultimate ask of the CSL model. But in terms of the revenue categories we're projecting that we can somewhat control, we're expecting a $34 million increase in property taxes, about a $30 million increase in the tuition, and then a bit of a decline in our other categories. So $64 million in new revenue going into next biennium is what we're projecting as a collection of schools. So kind of the key numbers I want to hold on to there, the $1.7 billion, that's the total amount of projected revenue for the current biennium. I want each of you to keep in mind that 64 million, which is the new revenue we anticipate bringing in, other than state aid, the new revenue we anticipate bringing in going into next biennium. Because we're kind of going to break this into 2 parts. The deficit model, the deficit spending we have going on in the current biennium, and then separately we're talking about new asks or new growth going into next biennium. Okay, questions on this slide before we kind of talk about the expenses? Okay, John, go ahead and take us there. Thank you. Okay, so now we're looking at the expense side of this model. Again, you see there the 21-23 projections. This is based on our survey results. So we are projecting our expenses to total $1.8 billion for the biennium, the current biennium. So bouncing that off of the number I just pointed out, our total projected revenues for this same biennium was 1.7. So in total, across all schools, we are looking at a $100 million shortfall for the current biennium. Meaning we have $100 million more in expenses than we do in revenue. And so anytime a school spends more than they bring in, they can only have one place to make up that shortfall, and that's with our fund balance or our reserve funds. So in total, we can say that community colleges are projecting to spend $100 million of their existing fund balance in order to make it through this current biennium. We do want to add an additional number to that, and that is the one-time use of HERF funds. So as we saw on the revenue slide, these projections do include $53 million of one-time HERF money. So that, of course, as we all know, is not expected to go forward into next biennium. So if we pull HERF off the table, knowing that that's not an ongoing revenue option for us, we look purely at the operational results for all the schools combined. We're really looking at the 100 million, and it's actually 98 million to be specific, $98 million shortfall $53 million of HERF money that will no longer be there equates to $151 million of a projected operating deficit in this biennium, the 21-23 biennium. So that's kind of the first segment of funding we're talking about. The existing deficit model we're in right now. Then, as now we're moving forward into changes for the new biennium. So we're projecting, as you can see there, the percentage increase in the different expense categories from salaries to health insurance and so on. Based on those projected increases, we have, that's in the dollar amount column, we have a projected increase of $221 million in new expenses. Again, these are new expenses that would kick in beginning in the 23-25 biennium. So $221 million in new expenses. If you'll recall, one of the numbers I wanted to hold on to from the prior slide is the new revenue we expect to bring in going into next biennium, and that number was $64 million. So we're bringing in a projected $64 million in new revenue, but we need an additional $221 in new expenses. The difference between those two, $157 million. So tying back to some of John's comments, the $157 million represents sort of the new ask in new growth going into 23-25. The $151 million really represents the current operating deficit that we have in the 21-23 biennium that, of course, is being inherited by the next biennium right off the top. So in addition to inheriting a deficit model, we have new expenses on top of that. So hopefully that made at least a little bit of sense to piece together the current biennium operating deficit. In addition to the new ask, that's $151 million plus the $157 million equals the ultimate $308 million CSL ask that this model helps us generate. So it kind of fills everything in, projected growth, projected revenue, and then says to make all this work, we need $308 million in CCSF for this model to work. Did I miss anything, John, that we need to touch on there?
John, you're muted.
I think unless there are questions, I will keep moving through unless folks want to stop on the current service level model.
No, let's go
Okay.
forward.
Thanks, Justin. I'm going to skip over. This just gets into the federal funds, and here you can see, I mean, one of the points we were making is that, you know, the colleges there was an expectation with the federal funds to maintain employee levels. And again, that kind of gets back to what I was saying about what the colleges generally would have been already likely ramping down. Well, they would have been already ramping down, and that process is sort of now beginning because the federal funds were maintaining those levels. So just quickly to run through the two other packages here. The first is really aimed at low-income, first-generation underrepresented students through expanding CTE, but also the supports for CTE. So career path, looking at both career pathways and CTE. Also with a big focus on students with some college and no degree, looking at increased advising, career coaching, and benefits navigation. Direct grants to student for non-credit certificates. We have a lot of students who will want to come in for non-credit certificates that get them right into the workplace, but they can't actually get aid for that. They don't get federal or state aid for those programs. So things like direct grants to students in areas like that, or transportation and child care grants. Also support for ABE, ESOL, and GED, because many of the students that we will be wanting to focus on here also require those basic skills or English as a second language. And so we really want to wrap around those services with any new CTE funding so they're not separate, because we know if we're going to help these populations, you know, we need to wrap around those services. Also, a lot of the students coming back, particularly students with some college no degree, may face debt to the colleges that they have not been able to pay back and can't re-enroll. And we would look to forgive that so that they can come in and re-enroll. We've also included in here, you know, models that would allow students to do things like refresher courses in English and math without cost or a grade, so that there's no risk, because there's an awful lot of risk associated for adult students coming back and in the time that they can't, you know, that they lose working or something like that. And you know, we know that failing one of those courses right off the bat is one of the quickest ways for them to not move forward. I might turn it really quickly to Bruce Clementson from Chemeketa, who I believe is here and is the Director for Student Affairs, to see if he wants to add anything that I didn't cover or cover any other points on this.
Thanks, John, and thank you for commission listening today. I think our team in looking at this is trying to find an on-ramp for a pathway for folks that see higher education as a risk-taking adventure of their time and money. And we would like to find a no-risk methodology that gets students a sense of purpose for their program, and at the same time sets them up with all the resources necessary. But to do that, they need some type of grant structure, as discussed kind of in the financial aid piece, to afford to find the time to investigate college and learn of their options and get prepared to re-enter at the time that they see fit. So this is, again, try to work with our adults and students that are unclear about how to access college for their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for John or Jess or anyone else in the group? Or John, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
Oh, we've got one more, and I just want to quickly.
You're close to finish. How's that?
Yeah, we're very close to finish, and I'm just going to run through this one very quickly. The third is for cybersecurity. Education is the sector most targeted by cyber attacks by a long way. I've got a graph on that right after. It's not even close. Since the pandemic, cyber attacks in education are up over 300% now, and they really pose a substantial and major threat, both operationally and financially, for colleges. We've seen around the country where colleges are shut down for weeks at a time because they've had severe breaches where they actually cannot operate, and none of the colleges are resourced, well enough for this. They're community colleges. You can see here in the graph. I mean, when I said it's not close, education in all sectors of business and industry, nonprofit, are by far not even close the most targeted sector. And within that, community colleges are often even more of a focus because there's a belief that community colleges are, as I said, are under-resourced in the area of cybersecurity. That is true a majority of the time. And so this would be a $12 million ask for colleges to add additional personnel. The colleges have spent a several-year process looking at a subscription for a security operations center. They have kind of a collaborative model that the more colleges that participate, they get a cheaper rate. But right now, most of the colleges actually don't have the resources to afford the subscription for the Security Operations Center as a subscription. So they're unable to participate in that. Also, ongoing training for staff and students, that's a constant need because, right, that's where the entry point is for cyber attacks, someone who clicks a link or someone who doesn't know what they should and shouldn't be doing, so you need ongoing training. Also, gap and resolution analysis, and, particularly for some of the smaller colleges. And then cybersecurity infrastructure enhancements. There are things that are one-time purchases that could be upgrading a firewall, things like that, but most of the costs in this area now are ongoing and subscription based. They're not like buying, a big piece of hardware or like things that cost one time. They are ongoing needs. And so again, this is just an area where we've seen attacks at colleges or attempts and attacks on colleges. They're continuing to grow, and it's just an area where the colleges and I suspect the universities as well have not had the funding that they need for as robust of cybersecurity that has become required. And with that, I am finished, and we'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Questions or comments on these packages? Commissioner Gillard.
Oh, thank you, Chair Rowe. John, can you back up? I missed a couple of slides because I was accidentally interrupted here to the CCSF ask, which was probably around slide 10 or so. Okay. Oh, you're going way too far. Yeah. So is that your ask of a change of 308? Yeah, I see it now. For 1.005 million for the CCSF ask?
Yeah, and as Jess pointed out, 158,000 net, or 157 million rather, it's net is the really the ongoing cost increases. The other about 150 million is really would be sort of the one-time potentially. I mean, it could be ongoing if the state wanted to completely maintain the current service level with no reductions, right? I mean, and that would maintain capacity should we hit a recession and students begin to come back. You would have that capacity ready. Should the state not want to completely pick up that cost, we would ask for funding that could be potentially one time, as again sort of a bridge or runway or whichever analogy you prefer, as the colleges start to make very difficult decisions that they're already beginning to make, based on the declining revenue.
Right, and the lack of HERF funding that people needed and depended on, and now it's gone. And so it's like you said, it's that ramp or bridge or skyway connection to the future to make things not as draconian come 2024, 25, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, John, and your colleagues. Dana Richardson. I know you're there. Yes, good afternoon. Welcome.
Chair Rowe and commissioners. For the record, my name is Dana Richardson. I'm here on behalf of the public universities this afternoon. In keeping with past practice, we are pleased to present 3 key components of our consolidated funding request today. Those are the equity investments, including the Opportunity Grant, as well as the Public University Support Fund. You can safely assume that the $50 million request that you see for the Opportunity Grant in our submission should be a minimum. We are supportive of increased financial aid investments, but we are focusing today on 2 components of those 2 components, including the Opportunity Grant and our request. We have other components of our consolidated funding request. Those are in our full submission, and we've also submitted separate one-pagers on programs such as the statewide public service programs, sports lottery, Strong Start, and of course capital is also in a separate submission. So we're happy to come back and talk about that at a later date. But without ado, I hope I'm about to share our slides, and President Tom Insko will take the lead.
Thank you, Dana. I'll just get moving right into it, given it looks like we're behind schedule. Chair Rowe and commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to share with you the public university's consolidated funding request. For the record, my name is Tom Insko. I'm the president of Eastern Oregon University. And you may recall that last biennium, this presentation fell 2 months into the pandemic during the height of COVID-19 lockdowns. And at the time when state economists were predicting that Oregon would lose billions in general fund revenues. And at that time, the governor directed the universities to model 17% budget cuts. And our request to the agency was focused on protecting our increasingly diverse student body from the dramatic cuts like what universities experienced between 2008 and 2012 during the Great Recession. These cuts back then resulted in double-digit tuition increases across all campuses, and we knew that our students in 2020 could not afford similar cost increases. And luckily, of course, with rebounding state revenues and meaningful assistance from the federal government, lawmakers found themselves in the position to invest rather than cut in 2021. The chart on the right of this slide gives you a sense of the magnitude of the federal funds and the institutional actions, cost-cutting actions that were taken to manage through the pandemic to limit or reduce the adverse impact financially to the universities. So today we're here with a budget request that builds upon the investments made in 2021 and 22 with really 2 goals in mind. First, we the universities, your commission, higher education stakeholders, and the governor must work together to provide solid base funding for universities and make, secondly, targeted investments that will allow us to serve students and close gaps that continue to persist in enrollment, retention, and completion for Oregon's historically marginalized and underserved student populations. Our presentation today will focus on the boxes that you see here on this slide in green, and we have provided additional information separately on the other funding streams. So I'd like to just thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to working with you to maximize state investments in higher education. So at this time, I'll ask Southern Oregon University's Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Toya Cooper, to highlight our equity achievement funding request.
Toya Cooper, are you there?
Madam Chair, she is having some audio problems, it looks like, which is a shame because I am a very poor stand-in for Ms. Cooper. But I can move us forward.
Yes,
Toya?
we're sorry too. Go ahead. If she comes on, she can take the ball from you.
Great. Well, I'm Dana Richardson. And I want to, on behalf of Ms. Cooper, share some of the information that we put together about an equity achievement set of investments on campuses. This is a really important complementary set of investments we believe could be made in addition to increased financial aid and opportunity grant. And there is Toya. We still can't hear you.
Okay.
I'll give her one more sec.
Are you able to get the audio, Ms. Cooper? She can hear us, but we can't hear her. Go ahead, Dana, please. Sorry, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming. Go ahead, Dana.
So you'll see in our consolidated funding request, we are requesting $100 million overall for equity achievement investments, $50 million of which would go to the opportunity grant, and another $50 million that would go to support targeted campus proposals. And you can find a full list of those proposals in Appendix E of our submission. In order to identify the proposals that you see in our complete submission, DEI leaders from each of the campuses identified programs, either new or existing, that had shown to be demonstrably positive for students who are traditionally underserved. Some of these programs were already in existence, and some could be developed as new programs. Certainly the ones that were already in existence were developed collaboratively with input from campuses and communities. As the DEI folks got together, you could really see that there were three kind of subject areas they fit into. One was—
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah. Let me just finish. Toya, I'll just finish this slide and hand it off to you.
Please do, thank you.
I was gonna say, so they fell into three types of proposals. One, helping students get started and get enrolled. Secondly, staying, being successful, retaining, and progressing toward a degree. And then completing that degree and connecting not to a job, but a career. So Toya's gonna highlight three particular examples from the campuses. Thanks, Toya.
Thank you so much, Dana, and forgive my technical difficulties. In my 6 months here, I still have not figured out how to manage IT. I'll work on that. And as Dana has just outlined, we talked about in these meetings that we had, getting students in, getting students through, and getting students out. And I talked about these as kind of a through line of imperatives in serving our historically underrepresented students. At Southern Oregon University, we have a fantastic pre-college youth program called pirates to raiders. And from the 2015 Consolidated funding that we received, we set aside some money to expand that program to serve 3 area schools. And what's fantastic about this program that serves to support not only Latino, Latinx students and their families and helping them to see high school as something that absolutely they can finish and college is something that they can access, is that this program not only graduates 100% of our high school students, but it sends about 85% of them on to college. We want to be able to support more of these students, not just in getting to and getting through, but getting out as well and being successful following that time. And more funding would help us do that. Portland State University has what is called the Multicultural Retention Services Program, and through a program of advising, support referrals, and advocacy for low generation, low income, first-year students, they support all of those imperatives that we discussed, getting in, getting through, and getting out. And they want to increase support for not only those students, but for the minoritized faculty and staff that support them, that serve as models for these students, that all of the research that I know you're all familiar with and that we are says helps students see themselves as being able to achieve in the same way that those models have achieved as well. Oregon Institute of Technology has what they call Ignite, and it is a health career workforce exploration project. And actually just this coming summer, what they're going to do as a partner in the South Metro STEM Partnership Program is work with area industry healthcare providers to help students in this underserved, historically underserved populations we're talking about, see pathways to careers in healthcare, right? And they will also talk about some of the known barriers that get in the way of these students being able to see themselves in those programs in these underserved populations. So this program will include a summer camp. It also includes a regional youth health corps program that serves high school students. The challenge is it's only a handful of students that they're able to support. So as we think through the kinds of things we want for students to be able to see themselves to do, not merely to serve them, their families, their schools, their regions, our schools, but our state, as well as our nation. And in my 6 months that I've been here, I have to tell you, every HEC document that I have read, every HEC meeting that I have attended talks about the benefits of this kind of equity-minded work inuring not only to the students and their families and our campuses, but to our state and to our nation as well. And we want to capitalize on this, and that's why you see the amount that we've asked for in our consolidated funding request. We are here. We have programs that have demonstrable success. We are ready and eager to capitalize on that success, to continue it and to innovate around it, and to be in partnership with the state to that end. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to a student, Anna Grape, who is one of the beneficiaries of some of this fantastic programming that we have going on. And Anna is at Portland State University, and she's going to share with you some of the work that's impacted her own experience and the kind of trajectory that this equity-minded work supports. Anna?
Hi, can everybody hear me? Perfect. Well, I'm excited to be here. This is honestly an incredible opportunity for me to see everybody putting in so much work into helping students like myself. I personally started back at school as a returning student at PCC in January of 2020. And at that point, I did not see a future for myself that was ambitious as I do see now. And one of the key pivots in the way that I saw my future was a teacher reached out to me about a program called Build Exito. And Build Exito really transformed me to see myself as an ambitious student, scholar, and somebody who is capable of success. I apologize, I live downtown, there is some background noise. And just a little bit about Build Exito. The mission of this program, it's a National Institute for Health program that takes underrepresented students from all varieties of backgrounds and places them into research learning communities. These are students with a specific health focus. And they provide a variety of support through academic advising, enrichment sessions, and peer mentor support that creates a really holistic support system for students. not only that, but you get real life research experience. Many students have been published in journals, and you also have the NIH on your CV, which for me has been a really incredible step towards feeling like grad school is an option for me, because I started out thinking I was going to achieve an associate's, and now I'm on the trajectory of planning to pursue a PhD. I personally am a student with disabilities, and I come from a low-income background below the federal poverty line. And so for me, historically, there have been a lot of barriers in between me accessing education just in general. So with the help of Exita, which offers not only stipends, but tuition remission, this is like the first time in my life that I have felt like higher education has been accessible for me. It has helped reduce a lot of those barriers. And so, let's see. I apologize, my screen is glitching.
That's okay. If you can wrap up in the next minute or two, or if you're finished, that's fine.
No, I think another program that I'm also part of is called the Trio Student Support Services, and they also help work on getting underrepresented students with a STEM focus access to additional really essential resources. And I think just to kind of wrap up, this program really helps diversify not only education, but it also helps students complete their education and then helps them prepare for careers. And I think by aiding in diversifying the STEM field, that's a strong investment in our future, and it's a strong investment in making sure that the community in science and politics and education, like these programs are going to make Oregon a place where underrepresented individuals can represent their communities in these fields and have access to those education. And I'm honestly really excited about my future. And this is like the first time in college when I felt like that was possible. So I really hope that this kind of program can continue to go forward and support students like myself, because it has created that same support system that has made education possible for me with the barriers that I face. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. It's inspiring to hear that you feel so supported for the first time. We appreciate you being here, and we're very pleased to hear that.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chair Rowe, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Jamie Moffett. I'm the Vice President for Finance and Administration at the University of Oregon, and I will do a very quick final slide for you to wrap up. In sum, I'm going to focus on just the proposal that's in front of you, which is a $78 million increase to the PUSF for the university-based funding. That's an 8.67% increase. What that represents is we go through a process similar to what Jim talked about with state CSL, where we try to look at all of our existing costs of running the institutions. And we basically do the exercise of saying, if we were to just keep everything the way it is today in terms of the level of faculty and staff support and activity level, what would it take to continue to operate in the future in the coming years, given inflation and other factors? We use a similar framework to CSL. Our numbers are somewhat different each year, and that's generally because we're looking at costs that are specific to our campuses. So for example, the state CSL calculation, I believe Jim said it uses just a non-state employee general rate assumption about compensation. We actually look at each of our labor contracts on our campus and basically project forward, if we're implementing those contracts as we're obligated to do, what's the cost going to be on the compensation side? And that's why you'll see some differences. But generally speaking, again, they're similar frameworks. They just have slightly different ways of calculating the figures. And this is the request that we have going into next year in terms of that base funding. And our hope is that the state can contribute a pro rata share of these costs so that we continue on an equitable path and these costs are not pushed onto the backs of students if the state doesn't continue to support those cost increases that we're seeing. So I will wrap up in the interest of time, and I believe if you have any questions, any of us are happy to answer them.
Thank you. And thank you for wrapping that up so well and so quickly. Questions, commissioners? Or comments? Are we good? Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Jamie, and others. Okay, we are a little bit behind. Jim, do we need to touch base on time, or you're confident we can finish? If we go to the Oregon Student Association now.
Yep, I think we're
Okay.
good.
Okay, and we're going back to Maggie Gates, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes. Hi. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Got it.
All right. Fabulous. Well, hello again. Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Gates. I'm the Legislative Director with the Oregon Student Association. And we are so excited to be here today to provide feedback on the HEC's policy option packages and the legislative concepts. So in preparing for this meeting, we took a look at that long list, very extensive and thorough, and identified which priorities students really want to focus on and where the highest need is. So that's what we'll be focusing on in this presentation. I am really excited to be joined by three incredible student leaders who I'm really excited for you all to hear from. They are advocates on their own campuses and have a really strong perspective on what students need and what their priorities are. So I'm excited to be joined by Brian, Elizabeth, and Nick, and I'll keep my section brief so that they have enough time to share their experiences. But to just start us out, as I talked about earlier in the financial aid panel, it is a hard time to be a college student in Oregon. The lasting impacts of the pandemic, increasing costs of living, inflation, overall decline in mental health that students are experiencing. It's already stressful to be a college student, and now after the past 2 years, it's so important that the state really steps up to support these students more maybe than they would necessarily have to in the past. So just some overall ways that we really identified that the HEC can in particularly be helpful is continuing to bring students into the process like you're doing today. We really are so grateful to be invited to provide feedback so early in the process, and we really encourage you to have students at the table when decisions are being made about their ability to succeed in higher education. We also want to encourage the HEC to support the full PUSF and CCSF to continue to provide those really critical student services and keep tuition costs down. And then, as I talked about earlier, there's a whole, I know you all will have to make some really hard decisions on what you prioritize in your budget ask, and there will be some things that may need to be cut, but there's this great work happening concurrently with the Task Force on Underrepresented Students for in higher education, and they'll be putting together some legislative priorities that I hope the HEC can back if you're unable to support things within your own budget. So I would just flag that as another opportunity to support student success. And then finally, and what we're going to touch on in the rest of this presentation is really prioritizing student-centric solutions. So what is it that we know is proven and we're hearing from students is helpful in their ability to succeed and achieve their degree. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Brian, who is going to talk about our number one priority, which is affordability. So go ahead, Brian.
Hi, thank you for that, Maggie. For some reason, I'm having issues with my camera, but I'll go ahead and carry on like this. Chair Cross and Vice Chair Rowe and committee members, for the record, my name is Brian Montez. I am the Legislative Affairs Director for the Associated Students of Portland State University, Portland State Student Government. And I'm here to talk to you all about affordability and why it is important to go ahead and increase the financial aid opportunities that Oregonian students have access to. Affordability, as it says on the slide, is the most is caused by economic insecurity, and this can impact students in a variety of ways, including tuition, housing, healthcare, food, books, and other basic needs. Students face a myriad of challenges while attending college. The majority of those issues are those issues that the HEC has the ability to address, and all these issues have to do with affordability. Getting money into students' pockets will in turn ameliorate so many of the barriers students encounter, whether it's housing, mental health care, or food or books. A very important thing that I would like to go ahead and acknowledge is the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our students, and especially with the costs related that students have to endure every day. The cost of attendance, tuition, fees, rent, food, and so much more has gone up since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it has done much more than that. It has exposed the inequalities that students face with access, opportunities, retention, admissions, and much more, especially those faced by historically underrepresented students. The problem is that, unfortunately, these issues have been here long before COVID-19 and the pandemic. However, it is the past few years that has really highlighted the impacts of this. And in turn, students have felt it in their wallets. They have felt it in their confidence to not only graduate, but also graduate debt-free and to move forward. It is important that we do our best to ensure that students have access to the funds that they need. A big thing that isn't really talked about oftentimes when we talk about student affordability and college affordability is all the costs that come with even attending college. So that's not including your tuition, that's not including your incidental fees or any other fees that you might have, but that's talking about housing. Here at Portland State, we have a variety of housing options on campus for our students. However, prices are rising just as they are everywhere in the nation, and that's not including students who live off campus. Portland State is a very big commuter school, as well as food and grocery basic needs that students have. And while our state has done a really good job of starting basic needs programs across all campuses and universities, this program, since it's at its very starting stages right now, it is important that we go ahead and invest in it. That's how we help our students now, by allowing them the opportunity to not just survive, but to thrive. And moving on to the next slide, there are a few key initiatives and proposals that OSA would love to go ahead and focus on, and those being the Oregon Opportunity Grant, the Oregon Promise Grant, the State Steady Work Program, Child Care Grant, and our Tribal Student Grant. Now, I won't take too much of your time talking about what it is these are. We all know what they are, but I would like to highlight the importance of these and the impacts that they have on our students. The Oregon Opportunity Grant and the Oregon Promise Grant will have tremendous impacts on our students if we increase the funding significantly. Right now, we have seen tremendous success with the students who have access to these grants, and our students who are being helped by these grants, they are particularly those impacted or those in the underrepresented communities. However, it is important that we don't leave anybody behind. The State Steady Work Program will go ahead and help bridge the gap in that a lot of our students face with their federal work study program, with other scholarships and other aid that they have. And oftentimes that isn't enough. So it is important that we go ahead and instate this state work study program to help students not worry about whether or not they need to go ahead and have a second or a third job on top of being full-time students. The next one that's also very important is Child Care Grant. 1 out of 10 approximately students here in Portland State are student parents, and they are a community that has oftentimes been overlooked. Yet it is very crucial that we invest in them as well, as they not only are the future generation of the state, but also they are parenting and raising the next generation that wants to succeed them. It is important that we don't overlook this community as well. And lastly, the tribal student grant. Our Native American community has been long ignored, especially here in Oregon, and it is important that we go ahead and increase their funding. And I'm saying this as a student who has seen the impacts of all of that has been going on around the state, these economic hardships. I've seen the impacts firsthand. I've spoken with my classmates. I have been to these resource centers myself, and I'm here to tell you that what we're doing here with our students is great, and it is working. However, we need much more because we can't leave everybody behind. And unfortunately, we are leaving a lot of people behind. But it is important that we go ahead and invest in our students and allow our students to have the opportunities and the access that we deserve. And I'll go ahead and introduce a colleague of mine, Nick, from the University of Oregon.
Actually, Elizabeth is up next.
That's okay, Brian. Good afternoon, Chair Cross, Vice Chair Rowe, and committee members. For the record, my name is Elizabeth Bross. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Senate President for the Associated Students of Western Oregon University. So here we are going to be touching on four different areas that all have a very, very clear correlation to one another. And so I first want to start by saying that seeing yourself in college does not begin the last 2 years that you are in high school. But more importantly, within the K-12 system, that is when disenfranchisement occurs that specifically target and affect marginalized and minority communities. So if students within the K-12 cannot see themselves within higher education, then we cannot expect to see those same students in higher education. So we must end this vicious cycle that perpetuates systemic barriers and inequities that also lead to injustices that all begin within the K-12 system. So a policy that could drastically impact breaking that cycle of systemic inequalities and inequities and barriers could be guaranteed admissions. So this would change the way that admission models function, and it would give students a second chance. So guaranteed admissions would be a strong first step in dismantling systemic and institutional barriers that reinforce the same systemic cycles that perpetuate stereotypes and the disenfranchisement of historically marginalized and minority communities. So the implementation of this policy could mean not basing a student's GPA on their acceptance. And so that could based upon their high school GPA and having that impact their college admission. So as a student, I was, when I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder. And I was only 7, and I have had to overcome many academic barriers, but my grades were never a measurement of my intellect. Rather, it was a measurement of what I needed for support to maintain that stability within my academics, especially in certain subjects. So let's stop allowing GPAs to symbolize the measurement of intellect and ability and start looking at the bigger picture of the curriculum that we are teaching in the K-12 system, the resources and services that we are also supporting within not only K-12, but within higher education. So admissions is one of the many first steps taken when getting into higher education. But before students even consider higher education, the biggest challenge for most students is figuring out how are they going to pay for college. So as a 4th year student at Western Oregon University, my FAFSA showed me that my financial aid contribution was $0 due to my parents' expected contribution. However, the FAFSA did not know that my parents are not paying for my education. I am paying for my higher education entirely, and I'm pursuing my graduate program at Portland State University, and I'm going to continue having to pay out of pocket and rely on scholarships. While I'm grateful and privileged to have my family and they help me and support me in other ways, I have entirely and will continue to rely on scholarships and my own money. So how can students focus on school, enjoy life, have fun, and make memories when they're working 3+ jobs and going to school full-time just to make ends meet? So this past summer, and we're going to move on into the last section of the Bridge program, which is something that I'm very excited to talk about. So this past summer, I was a part of the Destination Western program at Western Oregon University. And this was a 2-week program that gave incoming students the opportunity to get a head start and to get an idea of what college life would be like. So they participated in 2 weeks of reading and math classes, and they participated in a plethora of other activities and events that catered to ensuring that students had fun and were able to have access to basic needs. I am very grateful that WU has the financial opportunity to provide this program, and they'll be also able to provide it next year, and hopefully they'll be able to continue to get that funding to provide this program. And so they have this financial opportunity to do that for students. And I firmly believe that bridge programs like Destination Western have contributed to the success and retention of the students who needed extra support. As I mentioned before, the dated systems, processes, and models that are currently in place are not working. And I am not sure if they were ever constructed to include marginalized and minority communities and individuals. What students need is support, and for higher education institutions to care about students and be honest and true in that sense when they care about students by investing in bridge programs and to continue to expand things like the Oregon Promise Grant and the Oregon Opportunity Grant, like Brian had talked about. And so continuing to invest in the integrity of higher education is really important to ensure that we're matching, especially with the cost of living as things continue to go up. And it really is making it so that students are not just living in college, but we are simply just surviving. And so it's really important that we continue to re-examine that and look at the bigger picture and ensure that we're doing the best for students and setting them up for success as they're going to be the generations that have a really big impact on our economy.
Thank you.
Nick, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Great,
Can
go
you
ahead.
see me, hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, hello, Chair Cross, Vice Chair Rowe, and committee members. My name is Nick Keogh. I am a student at the University of Oregon. I am a former ASUO Senator of 2 years and a member of the UO Textbook Affordability Task Force. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all about 3 specific areas: open educational resources, academic holds, and mental health services on campus. So first, to start with open educational resources, as I am sure you are all aware, OERs, which are freely accessible teaching and learning materials, are a really impactful solution to the textbook affordability crisis on our campuses. The state has started to make some steps towards expanding access to OER, but it's still falling short in many areas, especially when it comes to funding for OER. As a community college student that transferred from LCC, I directly saw the impact of receiving funding from the state for our OER program there. I only paid for maybe about 5 textbooks during my whole 3 years at LCC, which was, a game changer. But as I got to the UO, where textbooks are much more expensive, I learned that our public universities are not receiving enough funding for OER from the state to have as robust of OER system programs as our community colleges are starting to have. So right now, OER programs are being funded through primarily 2 funds: the Community College OER Grant, which is only open to community colleges, and the Legislative OER Grant, which is open to both community colleges and public universities. With the latter, though, it sets it up to where university faculty are having to compete with community college faculty for this funding, and those teaching upper level and or graduate level courses are not eligible for any funding currently. So this is something that the UO Textbook Affordability Task Force is really concerned about. And when I talked to the OER librarian at UO, which is a position students had to really fight for, and there isn't one on every university campus across the state. When I talked to them, they said this is like one of the major issues preventing the success of our public universities' OER programs across the state. So expanding OER, is important at both our community colleges and our public universities. So we are looking to you, to find some more sustainable and plentiful funding for OER across all of our institutions. Next, I want to talk briefly about academic holds.
This is something that has directly impacted me as a student every term since I started at the UO, and I know a lot of my friends have went through this as well. Basically, if you can't pay your bill or you're a little bit behind, they put a hold on your account and you cannot register for the next term. So right now, like, unfortunately, as we speak, my account is on hold because I haven't been able to pay my bill for the last 2 terms. And this is coming from someone who receives the full OOG and the full Pell Grant. But as I'm sure you all are aware, like, since we haven't fully funded financial aid in the state of Oregon, even when you've received full OOG and full Pell, it still does not cover the full cost of your attendance. But yeah, because of this hold, I can't register for the fall term that's coming up. And fall term is my last term at the UO. And I have 1 class left that I need to register for to graduate. This is a class that fills up very quickly. And if I don't get into it because of this hold, you know, that prevents me from being able to get my degree on time. I am doing everything in my power to pay that bill. But just to paint a picture for you of how, like, dystopian things are out here for students, to pay that bill right now, I've actually been going through a process of interviewing for a game show on NBC that pays your tuition if you win. It's called College Bowl. It's the one hosted by Peyton Manning, but I'm in like the final round of interviews last week to find out if I'm going to be cast on it. But like, that's how, just to like show you, like, that's how desperate I am to pay that bill, to ultimately just get rid of this hold so that I can register for fall term. So yeah, it's tough out here, and like, we're going through desperate measures. And academic holds like this are punitive to students and pushing students out every day. Students should not have to go through desperate measures like I am to get our degrees. We should really look at eliminating those academic holds. And finally, just really briefly, I also want to talk about mental health. I can't overstate how much of a crisis this is on our campuses, especially with the pandemic. Students are really struggling, and our institutions in the state are really failing us in this area. At the UO, for example, if you need help or therapy, there is a long wait list that you have to go through, and there's a chance that you never even receive care at all. And if you're one of the lucky ones to get in, you know, it's highly likely that the therapy you do receive is not always the most quality, or it's not culturally competent if you're a person of color or a queer person, or if you hold a marginalized identity. So we need to do a lot more to address this critical area and fund quality and culturally competent mental health services on our campuses. So I know that was a lot, and thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
Maggie?
Yes. Hi.
We need to, can you bring us to a conclusion?
I'm going to have Elizabeth bring us to the conclusion. This is our last slide, and it'll be quick, I promise.
Okay.
Hi, yes, I am back, and this is Elizabeth speaking. So this presentation only addresses a fraction of the struggles that are deeply embedded within higher education. We are in a pivotal time in society where people feel helpless and hopeless. Higher education can be transformative for people and for society, but not if it is unattainable, unimaginable, and uninhabitable. It is up to you all to be genuine in providing a future that is habitable for the future, and it starts here. Thank you all for your time and your capacity.
Oh, thank you, students. Yes, there's nothing more important than listening to you, as Frank Gillard said. That's some amazing stories there. Are there any questions or comments before we move to the next section?
I just want to say thank you as well, students, for speaking up, speaking out, speaking bravely. It's tough. You're at an early age, but yet a prime age. And no one wants to see your prime age robbed of financial insecurity, due to financial insecurity, housing and food insecurities as well. So we're with you, and we do what we can from this end. Eventually, money-wise, it's up to the legislature, of course, to appropriate funding. But we'll do what we can, and we appreciate being together on the effort. Thank you, students.
Yes. Okay, we have 2 sections left, the faculty and staff, and then workplace development. Since this has been a marathon meeting, I don't want to go past 5. So we have about 20 minutes or so, and would like to have time for a few questions or wrap up with each one. Can we go ahead now with the faculty and staff?
We don't have an official representative kind of running it, so do you want me to just go ahead and get started?
Sure, that'd be great.
Awesome. Well, Chair Rowe and Chair Cross and everyone else, afternoon, y'all. I'm really happy to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Louis DeSitter, and I'm with the Oregon Education Association, where we represent faculty from 11 community colleges and staff at another 3. I will say that a lot of what you heard today, we find really fantastic. The investments that you all are looking at for the Oregon Opportunity Grants are desperately needed. The increased CSL from OCCA is also critical. And those last pops that the students kind of talked about are critical. The way we see education in higher ed is very much, there are 3 critical components, right? There is direct funding to the institutions to be able to do their work. There is tuition support for students, and then there is support for students both academically and socially. And all 3 of those packages are frankly critical to the community college system being able to function through the next biennium. If you all remember back in 2008, when we started making cuts due to the recession, at the same time that we saw students coming in, we saw tuition in our community colleges skyrocketing. So each of these things affects one another in a very meaningful way. And if we want to be competitive again, in these systems, it's going to take a big investment on all 3 of those fronts in order to do that. And these pops all here represent that. So I would highly encourage you guys to support them. I think the one thing that is missing is that academic support part that I talked about. The need to make sure that that faculty and staff are well paid, that these are good jobs, that we don't have a churn and burn type system is critical for students to be able to receive the academic support that they need. And that's the one thing that I think I see missing in all of these packages. But overall, they are a critical step in making sure that our system survives and in fact thrives and adapts to meet the changing economic needs of our communities. And we would really like to see them move forward, and appreciate being a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Steve Shea, are you next? Who's next? You're muted. Still can't hear you.
We do also have on the line Debbie Koreski from SEIU.
Steve, is it okay if I jump in front of you and you work out your audio? He's nodding. Yes. Okay, I'm going to do that. Good morning, or it's actually good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Koreski, and I'm here on behalf of the 4,500 members of SEIU that work on the 7 public university campuses throughout the state. They work in libraries. They support our IT departments. They do all different types of things. Our members. SEIU is a union of about 72,000 people. And 71% of our members across the state are women, and 60% earn less than $40,000 a year. So we are here on behalf to ask the commission to really sound the alarm and talk about why the investment in higher education is needed from the enrollment perspective. We know that the pandemic had significant impacts on enrollment across our universities and our community colleges, but it's really who we know from our workers who that really impacted. We know who didn't come back to campus. We know who did not show up. But I think that's really, we ask the commissioners to really really speak to the legislature, the public, the press, anybody who will listen about the students that were impacted. And we know that those were students who already had significant barriers accessing higher education. And then the pandemic just made it where they could not. And I don't know that we do that. We report enrollment by university, we report enrollment by community college, and I don't know that we fully told the story about what happened to our BIPOC community members through the pandemic and the challenges they had to access higher education. And I think if people, especially policymakers at the legislature, understood that better, they would understand sort of those big increases that the institutions are asking for in the support funds, right? And the drastic need to really invest in the Oregon Opportunity Grant and other financial aid programs that support students. I think that really is incumbent upon us to disaggregate that data and really approach this and show the data about not just the declines in enrollment, but who it impacted, adult learners. And so that's really, with that, I know that we're short on time. That's the main heart of our message, is that we know that from our members are seeing that, our members' families are feeling that impact where they can't afford to send their families members through the community colleges and universities. And so we really ask the commission to amplify that as much as you can. And thank you for your time. And Steve, I hope that you've gotten your audio worked out.
Let's try it again. Can you hear me?
You've got it.
So very good.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Chair Gross, Vice Chair Rowe, commissioners, HEC staff. My name is Steve Shea, and I serve as the president of the American Association of University Professors in Oregon. Today, my organization that represents instructional and research faculty, as well as graduate students across the state, wish to express our support for this budget. The proposed changes that the Oregon Opportunity Grants that serve over 44,000 of our state's residents are welcomed and would plug some of the gaps in the Pell Grants, as you've heard earlier today. In particular, efforts to increase the maximum grant from $8,000 to $10,000 a year is welcome to make our institutions of higher ed more open to those in greatest need. We also want to voice support for efforts to limit the amount of paperwork and streamline the application process for first-generation students. The affordability of higher education has seen dramatic increases for Oregon students over the past 15 years. National data tells us that the ability of U.S. citizens who are able to escape the harshness of poverty or low-income circumstances has slowed considerably over the past generation. Initially, the answer of taking out loans did provide access, but as we all know, the level of student debt that was incurred to fund higher education was unsustainable and a poor long-term policy for our national economy. The reforms offered by the Oregon Opportunity Grants and the Oregon Promise Grants are a light for all of us who care about higher education, the people who teach and research, as well as the students who want to graduate from our intellectually rich institutions. This reform will also assist in one key budgetary area. In an effort to increase access in the wake of tuition increases, many of our state institutions have offered more tuition waivers for students in need. We are glad that students are being offered assistance to make Oregon colleges and universities more affordable, but the problem is that those tuition waivers were a redirect from faculty resources and classrooms. The net result is that the budget that you propose partially fulfills this idea of an American dream. I'm also here to applaud the increase to the public universities' funding request. While the funding is still short of pre-2008 levels, as several people have mentioned, progress towards fulfilling our state public universities is being made, and representing instructional, research, and graduate employees, AAUP stands ready to assure Oregonians that their dollars are being spent to the benefit of students. Although it's not the purview of this committee, faculty across all levels are also eager to engage in conversations about shared governance and reform that will bring greater transparency to the budgetary process associated with curriculum, increasing funding for the training, hiring, and retention of diversity, equality, and inclusion, and working with our institutional board of trustees. The best example of those reforms might be Senate Bill 854, which was proposed in the 2020 legislative session. Financial responsibility, of course, is shared responsibility. This budget request is applauded by the members of the American Association of University Professors as it sustains the success of higher education. We thank the HEC board and believe that the state of Oregon is better for this budget request. Thank you so much for your time.
And we do have one final panelist, Madam Chair, Jaime Rodriguez with AFT.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Terry Cross, commissioners and guests. Jaime Rodriguez, AFT Oregon President. I do want to say thank you to the students of PSU, WU, and U of O, where we have faculty among AFT Oregon serving those campuses. And I have a prepared statement I would like to read to you all. For the record, I am Jaime Rodriguez, and I have the honor of serving as president of the AFT Oregon. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with my colleagues to share the perspective of over 17,000 members that AFT represents across Oregon. In reviewing the policy options, packages, and funding requests submitted by colleges and university partners, I want to recognize that Oregon is truly at a critical juncture as it relates to funding of post-secondary education. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on our BIPOC students in our public universities and community college who already face systemic changes in pursuing and completing their educational degrees. If Oregon doesn't use the 23-25 Biennium as an opportunity to make historic investments in higher education, particularly in financial support for students and investments to support faculty and staff, we risk further disparities in our education system. Put more bluntly, without investing the necessary resources, we risk having a higher education system in Oregon that is only accessible to the most privileged and wealthy, of which many AFT Oregon members are not. The pandemic has given us the reality of our faults in what we have currently in the system, providing for higher education assistance. While some individuals might see the funding and policy proposals before you today as large investments, the truth is the circumstances we find ourselves in require an investment of at least this level, if not more. If we're serious about ensuring equitable access to our education system for every student in Oregon, I am also heartened by the work that our legislature is doing through the Joint Task Force on Underrepresented Students in Higher Education to further identify the investments that we truly move the dial for our most underserved students in Oregon. I am hopeful that the task force will further emphasize the importance of the needed investments to support our students, staff, and faculty. In closing, I want to emphasize the important role that the HEC has in centering Oregon's higher education funding and policy conversations in equity. At this critical time, the HEC has a responsibility to sound the alarm to our public policymakers in the legislature that these investments are a necessary starting place if we hope to serve every student in Oregon who wants to pursue higher education. Let's assist them in their dreams and not kill those dreams. As we continue these funding conversations, I look forward to working with the HEC, the legislature, and other education partners to further bolster funding that will support students, faculty, and staff. AFT Oregon is here to help bring up education in Oregon. Thank you. In solidarity, Jaime Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Jaime and others. This has been very helpful. It really rounds out as we've gone around to hear of be reminded of our responsibilities and of the great needs and the powerful stories of all our stakeholders. So thank you all. Are there any questions for this group before we move to workplace development? Thank you. Okay. Last group. Who do we have? Oh, hello, Julia Steinberger. You going to start us out? Hello, welcome.
Yes. Thank you. Subcommittee Chair Rowe, Chair Cross, Commissioners. My name is Julia Steinberger. I am the Interim Director of the Office of Workforce Investments here at the HEC. I am pleased to introduce the members of today's workforce panel. Ann Mercereau is Vice President for Human Resources, Diversity, and Inclusion at Portland General Electric and Chair of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. Kim Parker-Uranus is the Director of Willamette Workforce Partnership and Chair of Oregon Workforce Partnership. Brooke Brownlee is State Legislative Affairs Manager at Portland General Electric and Chair of the Oregon Conservation Corps Advisory Committee. And Nathan Ricks is Deputy Director for Strategy and Policy at the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission and Chair of the Oregon Serves Commission. And I will turn it over to Anne.
Thanks, Julia. Hello, Chairs Rowe and Cross, and commissioners, other members of the committee, and staff. I'm really pleased to be with you all today. For the record, as Julia said, my name is Ann Mercer. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Portland General Electric and the Chair of the Workforce Talent and Development Board. And then we're going to be sharing a deck, and I hear you loud and clear, Chair Rowe. I will go through this very quickly. I can talk fast, I promise you, but I do want to take you through a couple of slides. So on we like to ground ourselves. Next slide, please. We like to ground ourselves in our one-page strategy, which was thoughtfully put together a few years back and then revised in 2020. And just some highlights to sort of center the conversation is our vision, which is really around equitable prosperity for all Oregonians. And our mission is to advance Oregon through meaningful work, training, and education by empowering people and employers. And an area that I want to focus on today is in the around, there's imperatives down the left-hand side, and there's an imperative there listed around identifying and aligning strategic investments. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those today. And then another area is in the creating a culture of equitable prosperity and some work that we've done there. So a couple things I want to call out. First is that we think it's really important that the work that we've been doing around increasing problem solving and critical thinking skills is really important in order to ensure that Oregonians are job ready. And that it's also important to align K-12, community colleges, universities, workforce, and employers with legislative strategy changes, including what we call essential employability skills, and then developing legislative and executive branch strategies and plans, including priorities and building focus. So on the next slide, we'll go into a little more detail. Thank you. So first up is this concept of essential employability skills. And I had the privilege a couple of years back of starting some work with a colleague of mine at Northwest Natural as part of the work at the Workforce Board to lead a task force on essential employability skills. And these are really skills around communication, adaptability, flexibility, professionalism, time management, critical thinking, et cetera. And recently some work was kicked off to put in place an advisory committee to further that work and to help that work grow some legs. And the board believes that these should be high school graduation requirements, that we should be adding requirements around proficiency in these priority employability skills. And we recommend the creation and development at the Oregon Department of Education an employability skills program. Additionally, under Future Ready Oregon, just very excited about that work. And we do want to recommend credit for prior learning, not just as one-time funding, but something that's funded over time. There's a lot of work and research around the importance of this, that the way and the shape in which people enter the education system is varied. And we think that credit for prior learning really supports that research. And then finally, the work that the Continuous Improvement Committee has been doing and making really good progress. Our second assessment there is coming up with a focus on the governance of the public workforce systems. And we're looking, again, and recommending funding for the future there, which is legislatively required. And we see this as a key priority to ensure accountability and ongoing governance. Next slide. On this slide, two main areas for highlighting. One is around Oregon Serves, and we also support staffing for grant management there and capacity building for this program. We support funding for in-state tuition and emergency assistance funding for AmeriCorps. And then last but not least, we're in full support of continued long-term current service level funding for the Oregon Conservation Corps at the current level of $10 million. So on this next slide, it kind of lines out what we're recommending. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and make these recommendations. So under our Oregon employability skills, we're recommending $5 million for the coordination, outreach, and promotion of this. Future Ready, as I just mentioned, $10 million there for the work on the Conservation Corps, $2.3 million for the Continuous Improvement Committee, a $2.8 million for the Oregon SERVS funding, and then finally $10 million for the continued funding of the Conservation Corps. And with that, I am going to turn it over now to my colleague, Brooke Brownlee, to talk a little bit deeper about some budget priorities. So Brooke, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Rowe, Chair Cross, and commissioners. For the record, my name is Brooke Brownlee, and I'm the chair of the Oregon Conservation Corps, as Ann noted. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I believe Todd has a couple slides that I'm going to run you through, but I'll go ahead and get started while those are popping up. So as Ann noted, our legislative request is $10 million for the 23-25 biennia, which would allow for continued investment in this critical programming. I'm excited to share what has been done to date with the legislature's allocation of $10 million last year. A little quick background on the Oregon Conservation Corps. We were created during the 2021 legislative session as part of the state's omnibus wildfire bill. The committee is charged with administering grant funding to organizations that combine the importance of reducing wildfire risk through fuel reduction programs with providing workforce training opportunities to youth and young adults. The legislature provided $10 million, as I noted, with the opportunity to access an additional $1 million if private matching funds could be raised by the committee. Next slide, please. As the committee reviews have evaluated the applications for proposed projects, the focus has been on those top two areas that you see. How does the proposed program seek to reduce risk within the wildland-urban interface? How does the program propose to provide work experiences, exposure to potential future careers, promote the development of essential employability skills, and any other valuable certifications? As the committee looks to add additional members and bring in different perspectives to the committee, we will also be looking at ways in which to raise funds to leverage that additional $1 million available as matching funds. I want to also note the unique nature of this program that is captured in the objectives of the Conservation Corps holistically that's reflected on the slide. It combines two critical needs of the state into one amazing program, reducing the threat of wildfire and providing hands-on learning experiences for youth to make a measurable and visible difference within the community in which they live. Next slide, please. I'm happy to report that as of today, the response from qualified organizations around the state for the first two funding cycles has demonstrated the clear need for these funds. We've awarded $7.3 million for 11 different projects around the state in some of the highest wildfire risk zones. The programs range in duration from 10 weeks to a full year. We have seen strong dedication from applications on reaching partners and members of underrepresented populations, and really thoughtful engagement with multiple stakeholders to ensure that the proposed project locations are in areas where the help is needed the most. The investment from the state is already making a difference as these projects are getting up and running, and I cannot wait to hear about all the good work that they're done in the communities throughout Oregon in the months ahead. I urge your support of an additional $10 million for this next biennia so this critical work can continue. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I will now pass it off to Kim with the note that I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, well, thank you. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chair Rowe, Chair Cross, and the commissioners. My name is Kim Parker Jadenis. I am the Executive Director of Willamette Workforce Partnership, the workforce board serving the Mid-Valley. And I'm also the chair of the Oregon Workforce Partnership, the state association of the 9 workforce boards from around the state. And I do not have any slides for you today, and I also promise to be brief. The good news is I see some definite alignment between the Oregon Workforce Partnership goals and the state board goals, so that's always nice. clearly, Future Ready is first and foremost on our brains, and continuing the implementation of that. And if there is potential for additional funding in the next session, that's something that we would consider. But in terms of the Workforce Board's work, our focus and our attention is on implementing this once in a generational investment. But just want to recognize that that is a wonderful priority to have identified by the State Board. The primary agenda for the Oregon Workforce Partnership for 2023 is the implementation of the Continuous Improvement Committee recommendations. Also, as Ann mentioned, this was Senate Bill 623, which was passed in 2021, and that work is off and running, and we want to make sure that it continues and that we are thoughtful and we can fund many of the suggestions and recommendations that the initial assessment came out of the initial assessment, and additional activities as well. There is a Oregon Youth Employment Program that has actually been on the books for many years and was funded for the first time in 2021. And we would love to have that continued funded in 2023. So we will be advocating for that and telling the stories about what that investment has done this biennium, which is quite exciting. And also the continued funding for 3 other areas that we have been implementing with our general fund over many years. Those different programs are work experience. So this funds participants to actually get into a job and have basically a paid internship of some sort. It's been very effective and is really a opportunity that would not otherwise exist for many individuals. Part of these funds also pay for support of the work that we do at the Workforce Development Board level. And so, of course, we want to see that continue. And then our sector strategies. Each workforce board identifies what is driving the economy in our region. And those targeted sectors take our priority when we expend our dollars. And so we want to continue funding those activities as well. And that concludes our priorities for 2023. Obviously, they are a work in progress, and we have a retreat as an association in July, so we will be refining and formalizing these. And I will hand it, any questions, or if not, I will hand it over to the next presenter. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Hi, Chair Cross, Vice Chair Rowe, members of the Commission. My name is Nathan Ricks, and I'm the chair of Oregon Serves, the state commission which distributes AmeriCorps funding across the state. I want to thank you in advance for having this opportunity to present, and I do invite you to have us come back and talk about our future priorities and see what we can do together to advance the overall goals of HEC and the strategic plan. I want to shout out and thank Carrie Bauer, our program manager, and Julia Steinberger for making this inaugural opportunity to present our priorities to you. Next slide, please. So who is Oregon Serves? We bring in over $3 million in federal dollars annually to fund AmeriCorps programs that place over 200 members annually in communities across the state, and we help meet some of the community's most pressing needs. I'm a former AmeriCorps volunteer myself. I did my service in New York and have been in Oregon the past 10 years. This biennium, the programs that we leveraged with state funding resulted in $5.7 million supporting AmeriCorps Corps members, and the volunteer hours were totaled over 500,000. I think the total was 560-something thousand hours, which if you translate that into dollars, over $14 million in value for the biennium for service hours in Oregon alone. Next slide, please. I won't go over this in detail just because of time. I want to honor your time, but I do, ask if you're reviewing materials later to go over some of what we have identified here. Particularly, we've selected some of our data that supports all that we're doing around higher education in terms of feedback from AmeriCorps members that have served, all the way to how active alumni are becoming in their community in a post-service time. I do want to mention in terms of our strategic focus and our priorities, we have a lot more data in our actual state service plan, which I encourage you to look at. But the feedback from surveying and when we have program managers in AmeriCorps areas that come to present to us, the theme that we're hearing through and through, which cuts across all these strategic focus areas, is above and beyond housing affordability. We hear rent is unaffordable, there's limited housing available, move-in costs are unaffordable, available housing is often really far away from site placement, and even monthly utilities really strains a lot of our volunteers. So what we're putting forward, and you can go to the next slide, really is to help toward that end of stabilizing our AmeriCorps folks that serve across the state and communities that need it most. I'll quickly touch on these three and then I'll finish up. Per our first request, our first priority request above the current service level, I want to say we had a tremendous legislative session. Our commission was successful in making a change to Oregon tax law to make the around $10,000 stipend that AmeriCorps receive for education tax-free in the state of Oregon. And only a few other states have done this. Proud that it was bipartisan. It was initially sponsored by the late Representative Gary Leaf and then brought into a larger committee bill by Rep. Nathanson. We worked alongside them to inform them along the way. We thank Senator Wagner for helping us push through the Senate and really beat the odds in being able to partner with legislators directly. And we're proud to be partnering with you all to get this, if we can, these three priorities in the governor's budget process. First one you see here is about extending that achievement that we were able to get through the legislature to not only make the tax stipends tax-free, but also to just extend that and to make another benefit of if AmeriCorps members serve in Oregon and they want to use that stipend, we ask that we change the law here to give in-state tuition. We think that would be an incentive to honor the service they've done here and also incentivize students that have used this work to stay in Oregon, right? And not to take that stipend to New York or Chicago or somewhere else where they could presumably use it. We also would like to have a state match for that ed award up to $3,500. So it's a roughly $2 million ask. Second is really around that housing issue that I mentioned. We want to create a virtual watering hole, a hub for finding housing, and create a grant program to help meet that assistance. We can do that to the tune of $350K, and we'd love your support in moving that forward. If you'd like to invite us back another time, we can do a deep dive in the platform that we're piloting. So we're already starting to solve this without the funding, but we really need your help in pushing this forward in the governor's budget to take the next step. And then lastly, critical for our continued growth, we're asking for these three positions here to support first and foremost in natural disasters and being able to be prepared, to be able to coordinate so we can apply for more grants. We think we can apply for grants that are more than enough to cover the cost of this position, so the ROI would be high if you're able to help support this. And then finally around coordination, around housing assistance, using this tool that we're piloting, and really just to continue to maintain our service, we're looking for that volunteer coordinator. So these are respectfully submitted to you for your consideration. Like I said, we had great success legislative session, and we want to continue to partner with you as we move this work forward to promote volunteerism in Oregon. Thank you very much, Chair Cross, Co-Chair Rowe, and happy to answer any questions if you have them now or at some point later.
Thank you. Julia, is there anything else on this? And are there any questions for any of these programs as part of workforce development, excuse me?
Thank you, Chair Rowe. Nothing else.
Any questions, commissioners? I'd just like to say, well, first I'll give other commissioners a chance to wrap us up or to speak to the benefit of everything we've heard this afternoon. I know it's been a long afternoon, but and then I will wrap us up after that. Commissioners, anyone?
Chair Rowe, I just want to say for a long time we've been wanting to do this much earlier, and with and come to the budget process with a much more united voice, and to support increases to support for higher education. So I really thank the staff for putting this together and for your leadership today and getting us through this very intense look across the board. So thank you.
Thank you. You hit just the right notes. It has been wonderful to hear how these interlock with each other and support each other, not compete with each other. It's been especially good to hear them this early in the process. I was rushing at the moment and didn't stop long enough to thank the Oregon Council of Presidents, Dana, and the Consolidated funding request and the care with which you put everything in, or a lot of it, in the equity lens, and in the help to disadvantaged students. So I thought that was very good too. And the whole afternoon really reminds me of, as a journalist, as an editor, I used to always think of myself trying to walk around all the facets of a prism in order to get a story right, that you really had to walk around the outside of it and see all these different pieces. And that's the way I felt about this program this afternoon and its benefit to the commission and to us individually as commissioners. So for staff and for participants, and especially for the students who came and who spoke to us of their experiences, we really appreciate it. And thank you very much, Ramona, for shepherding this through, and Jim. Lee Ayers-Probosky, do you have a comment?
I do, and thank you. I'm so appreciative of seeing the totality of the circumstances. I mean, really being able to see what it is that's at stake from all the facets, and to really understand that the levers are just really delicate and can really shift the winds so dramatically just by a small touch if we're not careful. So thank you to all that contributed. I appreciated hearing the pieces about the faculty and the staff as well. A huge part of what we do at the institution are our students, and certainly the faculty and the staff make the institutions as well. So I appreciate all who contributed today, and our student testimony is always spot on. It always pulls at the heart so strongly. So thank you, everyone.
It does that. Okay, if there's no further business before this committee, we are adjourned. Happy cat. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.